All right, let's talk about the mother wound. Now, I'm going to talk about father wound in another video, and this is archetypal, meaning everyone has their version of this experience. It's in a sense built into the evolutionary experience, the consciousness from a personal level of our evolution. So, no matter where you are, this is not just important because you've experienced some form of mother wounding, but because the mother wound also represents our relationship to God and creation and love itself. And this is really true with both of our parents, right? Because as a child, we associate them with God, our creator, our caretakers. We derive a sense of self from them. And these are all characteristics that, religion will give to God. You're a son or daughter of God. You're not just a boy named Brandon. You're a son or daughter of God. You're made in his image. And so we archetypally experience our version of that with our parents as the God stand-ins. And it will create, number one, our persona. Majority of our interests are actually not our own interests. This is something that you'll come to see, that some response to how you were parented, whether it was there was neglect, or there was an overbearing suffocation where your needs didn't matter, or you had to become the adult for your parents, or you had to be the good boy or good girl, or perfectionism was the pattern, or rebelling was the pattern, and fighting for the sake of fighting and taking pleasure in upsetting them because there was a constant power struggle, or if you were the peacekeeper, or if you had to avoid conflict, right? You can actually, from those patterns, derive hobbies and interests that help you sustain and justify and rationalize the pattern versus feel the pain that was initially experienced and undo the pattern out of self-protection. For example, a sport. You might have fallen in love with a sport, but what actually happened is you fell in love with the safety that the sport provided because it took you out of the household. And you felt included and you felt valuable. And you only felt that when you were playing basketball. So you think basketball is your passion, but really the connection, the love, the value, the I'm fitting in now, I'm seen now, is what you're actually feeling. And you'll see that once you start healing the mother wound and the father wound, in this video we'll focus on the mother wound, some of those hobbies might change. You might not feel drawn to them anymore. And to the little part of us, that could be scary because we go, oh, I'm going to lose the connection. I'm going to lose friends. I'm going to lose my identity. But losing your identity actually creates connection. It doesn't foster disconnection, and we'll talk about that in this video. So before I get too into it, I'm going to share with you my story of the mother wound and how I've experienced that, what I've learned from it, what I've transformed, and how also, I'll add this in there, as long as there's a mother wound or father wound, any wound really, but I'll use them, as long as there's a mother wound and you're a man, you will attract partners that are your mom. And typically you're either recreating mom, very similar to her patterns. If she was emotionally unavailable, you'll attract an emotionally unavailable. If she was really needy, you'll attract needy. Or you may attract the exact opposite. Now, the exact opposite of not being needy could actually bring those characteristics out in you. And so, again, you're going to attract what is designed to bring the wounding to the surface. So if you had a really needy mother and you judge that, you'll either attract a needy person to judge or you'll become the needy person that you judge. There's no way around it. And when you see that this stems from childhood and you see the innocent part of you that adopted a story about yourself in response to mother, you see that it's not personal. You see that it's innocent. It's not the partner's fault. It's not your fault. And you could take ownership, and you can meet the pattern and the addicted way of thinking, because that's really what we're working with, a pattern of thought. You can meet that with compassion and understanding and inquiry, and drop it and see that it actually doesn't protect you anymore. Because remember, that's why these patterns stick around. I'm going to talk about this later. I'm getting a little ahead of myself, but all patterns stick around because you're getting something positive out of it, seemingly positive to the ego. Could be attention, validation, power, control, adoration, love, whatever it is. But the very fact that a distorted pattern is the means by which you're receiving those things means there's a part of you that doesn't believe, or that is so convoluted with beliefs that you don't feel, most importantly, like those characteristics are just innate. Being valid for existing, being loved because you exist, because you are, giving yourself attention, doing what you want to do, putting your passion and excitement first. There's beliefs and thoughts in the way of that being your default because of the mother wound, in this case. So I'll give my story of the mother wound, and then I'll break down some signs and symptoms of the mother wound. How do I know if I'm experiencing a mother wound? Then if you're a woman watching this applies to you as well. But I'm going to use it in the context of a man, because that's my experience. So I grew up in a middle to upper class family, very standard American family, white picket fence. Mom worked at the school. Dad was soccer coach, not for us, but for my older brother. Dad worked a lot, and mom stayed at home for the most part, and then would help with the business as well. And, but for the most part, she was in the caretaker role. And my dad didn't know how to handle his anger. And I'm going to explain why this is relevant to the mother wound. And there was a part of me, me and my brothers were afraid of dad. And this produces a certain type of man, by the way, when this isn't integrated at a young age. So we saw a man who was angry and didn't know what to do with it. And often it would just come out, even if it wasn't directed straight at us, we would feel it and we didn't know what to do about it. And so we just modeled mom. And what would mom do? Just get out of the way, not create conflict. People please, soothe, comfort, not have any conflict in front of the kids. So this is what we start to learn. This is one side of the mother wound that we start to learn. Okay, anger's bad. Number one, because it's being danced around. I mean, it's not met with love. It's not met with understanding. It's not brought into awareness. It's just kind of in the background, and we're kind of just trying to stay safe from it. So we're modeling mom. Well, what do we do? Okay, kind of pretend it's not here. So that was one phase of learning how to respond to anger. So then as kids, we go, okay, well, that's bad to be angry and confrontational. So we don't want to be bad, because the way mom responded to that, we could tell it wasn't loving, even though it seemed like it. It was based in fear. So we learned that's something to fear. So of course we suppressed our own anger, and we didn't want to be the ones to start conflict, because that wasn't welcome. That was avoided, pushed down, manipulated around, manipulated to not be in conflict, lie, and sometimes lying is just withholding information. So this is what we're learning. Okay, let's just lie to ourselves, tuck it under the rug, live in fantasy a little bit, like escape reality, because obviously we can't confront what's here. And conflict is bad, anger is bad. So as a child, what do? You attempt to be good. Okay, now move down the line a little bit. My older brother, he's about almost 9 years older than us, had a drug addiction for 7 years. Every drug. I mean, he did everything. He had friends that committed suicide. I mean, a really intense journey for him. My mom took a lot of blame, a lot of responsibility for that. And she even went to school to learn about drugs and try to help him, and which was really admirable. And she made sure me and Josh, my twin brother, I have a twin brother, wouldn't go down the same path. So she became very possessive. Okay, you're going to a friend's house, have the parents call me as soon as you get there, check in later, you can't go to the party, you can't do this. You know, it was like overbearing. Your needs don't matter. Your job is to make me feel secure by giving me your autonomy. I'm going to give you autonomy, but not really. You know, I'm going to watch everything. And we didn't want to have conflict with her, right? So we lied and withheld and snuck around. Because, of course, conflict was bad. Expressing our anger towards her directly was bad. So, of course, there was all this passive aggressiveness and anger that was still there. And we just worked around it by deceit and deceiving. So the second thing we learn is we're not allowed to have boundaries. We're not allowed to do what we want to do, make our own decisions. We need approval from mom. We need her to know, she has to know everything. She has to be okay with it. It's our job to make her okay. So now think about this in a context of a romantic relationship. My job is to make you feel good. My job is to look good in your eyes. My job is to not create conflict. And, if I'm attracting my mom, you're going to be needy and I'm going to rebel against you through avoidance, through breaking agreements like I did with my mom to prove that I'm free, to feel free, right? So as this developed as a child, it was like overbearing mom created, number one, anger that we felt like we couldn't share, so it was deceit and rebelling. And then it also created no boundaries. I can't say no. People pleasing, codependency. And I just had the other one. For me, it was a feeling of not being adequate, which is an interesting way that my younger self interpreted this. Oh, if my mom isn't going to let me make choices, I wonder why. Oh, I'm going to make the wrong choices. I'm going to fail. And if the only way to get love is to be really good, I have to be really good at everything. I have to be successful. I have to prove to her that my way is the good way because I felt for so long that my way isn't good, that I'm doing something wrong, that I have to hide and lie and, be someone for my mother, not just be me with all my wants and desires. And so in the rebelling, there was also a need to prove myself and gain her validation because simply the act of wanting to control and suffocate felt invalidating, like there's something wrong with me. Why would she think, God, my nose is so itchy. I think I'm peeling from a sunburn. She'd only want to control me if there was something wrong with me. Okay, so there's something wrong with me. I need to perfect and change and present so she could just love me unconditionally, because that's what control and change, I want to change you, that's what it communicates. There's something wrong with you. So now take this into relationships. I'm going to recreate my mom. And let me add this in too. She was also very loving, like when there was something, an issue that I would come up against. Like I remember this time when I was a child and my brother and my cousin and I were playing doctor and looking at each other's parts and, oh, what do you have? This is what I have. And for some reason after that, and this is how young of an age shame can get wired in unconsciously, I felt ashamed of this innocent exploration as a kid. And I go to my mom because I knew it was safe, because she would tell us, if you're ever sad and you just need a place to cry and you want me to hold you, just come to me. So we also had that. So I had this unconditional place where it's like, oh, I felt really bad and I felt safe and I went to her and I would cry and I would be held. And it was like that kind of love. That's God's love, in those moments. So it was this interesting dichotomy of there's so much love here. I want that. And there's this other side where I don't feel loved at all. In fact, I feel abandoned. I feel like you're not supporting me. And sprinkle in moments in my life, when my brother was deep in drugs and having arguments with my dad and wanting to fight my dad. I remember this really intense moment where he wanted to fight my dad, and I went into the other room crying, scared, not knowing what was going on, and I'm just screaming to myself, leave Brian alone. I was trying to defend Brian, and I'm just screaming all of my thoughts out loud, and I'm freaking out. I don't know what to do. And Brian comes in and he holds my hand after their confrontation. They didn't end up fighting. And he just looks at me and he goes, don't do drugs. That was how I first found out that he was a drug addict, but I was still in denial about it as a kid. I go, no, that couldn't be true. My mom makes drugs so bad, I can't accept that he's doing that. I just kind of, blocked it out. It didn't hit me until later, until our parents sat us down and actually shared that with us. So in that moment, I felt completely abandoned and alone. So there's this dichotomy of there's so much love here. Give me all this love. And when I need you, you're not there. And the way that I want to be supported in my life and my choices, you're not there. So now paint that onto a relationship. For years, I attracted a very needy, somewhat narcissistic, and these are not judgments, it's just describing behavior patterns, person who needed me to be a certain way for them, right? Codependence. And why did I attract that? Because I had all those same traits playing out in a different way. I would love someone so hard, you can call it love bombing. I didn't even know that term at the time. Because I would feel like this, oh man, they're loving me, this unconditional love of the mother that I crave. And typically they admired my work, which is something I didn't get from my mom initially. There's always conflict there. You need to work a 9 to 5, do this, do that. And it was like, hell no, I'm not going to do what you want me to do. So I just craved the validation. So I would attract these women that would validate my work, that would validate me, that would make me into their life, that's what my mom did, and want to love and be there for me in my vulnerability in a really powerful way. But over time, I would start to avoid a little bit because what was choosing the relationship was my mother wound. It wasn't my essence. I chose very safe women so I wouldn't get abandoned, so I wouldn't be left like I was left in the room that time when I needed my mom and she wasn't there. Or when I felt like I needed her to approve of my life path and she couldn't. Or I felt like she needed to let me make my own decisions, but there was something wrong with me. So I would choose women that were dependent on me. And how would I create that scenario? I would tell them, stop working, only follow your passion. Don't do anything you don't want to do. I'll take care of the house, the bills, the everything. I basically became dad. So of course I attracted women with dad issues. So here's everything. Now I'm feeling significant, powerful, valuable. And in return, I knew they would never leave me. So I had this illusion of safety if all these conditions were right. They accepted my work, got that. Now, because basically I'm just recreating my mom and I'm trying to get from this relationship what mom didn't give me. That's the core of the mother wound. So I'm trying to get acceptance over my work. I'm trying to feel unconditionally loved and supported in my vulnerability. This just went off. There we go. And also I wanted to feel absolutely free. Like I didn't have any restrictions, which in a committed relationship is hard. If it's from a wounded place. So what would happen is the women that I would attract, because my wound was picking them, it's not like there was love, there was compatibility, there was all of these things, but it wasn't coming from my essence. So over time, I wouldn't feel nourished by the relationship. It was like I would realize that this isn't really what I wanted. But the fear of leaving the relationship and having no one, which is basically going back to the child that felt he needed mom but didn't get mom and felt totally like he was going to die, because at that time, that's a legitimate experience. You're depending on them for shelter, food, for all of your basic needs. So it feels like death. And if that's not healed, it comes into adulthood. And if you have a fear of not having women in your life, validating you, loving you, having sex with you, complimenting you, then that's actually a direct path through the mother wound. I'll talk about that in a moment. So I would attract these women that initially fit they were the perfect mom. They're never going to leave. They love me. I'm their life. Now, over time, that would create resentment on both ends. They would start resenting themselves for giving up their life for me, for safety, security, and love. And I would resent myself for saying yes to something that wasn't a total yes. And for, in a sense, trying to make someone into something for myself that could only ever give me temporary satisfaction, but was still me searching for the unconditional love in the mother outside of myself. And because of that, I would find shortcomings in them, and they would, over time, want to change and control my autonomy, just like mom. And then invalidate my work. Oh, look, you teach this stuff, and you're doing this and that, right? And then I would, because I was so afraid of leaving, find exit strategies. Plan B. Make connections. Cross boundaries. Cheat. I would sabotage the relationship because instead of meeting that really vulnerable, scared part of me, which, I would meet it in layers. It was not like I just ignored this part. I would meet it in layers. But like an onion, this is work. It takes work and time to let those layers unfold. So in the meantime, when I was coping versus transforming the pattern, it was like, oh, I just need a different woman. So as soon as they failed to become perfect mom and give me all the love but not try to control me, not leave me, be there for me and all my vulnerability, all of it. As soon as they didn't meet that standard, it was like, okay, on to the next one, on to the next one, on to the next one. And so I was creating and recreating the ideal mother that women could never live up to, that created an endless failure that, of course, over time, I just looked at myself and went, this is just proving that there's something wrong with me. It's just proving it. Because every relationship would get better, but the same wound was driving it. So it always came up short. And until I could see it clearly, I just thought I just internalized that. Oh, this is a me problem. First, it was a them problem. Then it was a me problem. Then it was, oh, this is a mother wound playing itself out from childhood. There's nothing wrong with me. There's nothing wrong with them. This is just conditioning playing itself out until it's seen and understood. So I'll talk about breaking the pattern and then a couple more. If you probably got a lot, you could probably see yourself in a lot of this already. Breaking the pattern. Number one is seeing it. Ask the question, what type of woman am I attracting? Emotionally unavailable. Or the opposite end, extremely emotionally available, where they're going to give up their entire life to be there for you. So interestingly enough, sometimes those two things are the same thing playing out in the different sides of the coin. I'm going to be there so for you. Everything is for you. Okay, how are you feeling? Yeah, I'm fine with that. It's fine. And that might be true for a certain amount of time. But most often, when the woman is playing that role of nurturer and they're deriving their sense of self-worth, or they believe they need to do it to sustain the relationship so they feel safe and secure because you're daddy, then there will be resentment over time. It will be exhausting, and they'll agree to it. And so that's actually being not fully available because it's not true. It's not their absolute truth. So the unavailability is their unwillingness to face why they're in that pattern. So that's emotional unavailability doesn't just look like neglect and avoidance and withholding. It can also look like self-betrayal and over-giving, right? Because that's a form of manipulation. And you could look at put yourself in those shoes as well. So look at what you're attracting. Again, for me, it was they're very available in the beginning, very available. And then over time, either they want to control and change me and I pull away from their neediness, or I start to feel needy and make them and their behavior and them not being there for me the problem, which I experience both of those with mother. You're not there for me, it's your fault. Now I'm angry. Which anger in that case is energy that I'm expressing to get you to change, to avoid looking at the pattern in myself to change. So again, first step to break the patterns, how is it showing up for you? Look at the characteristics of the women showing up in your life. Are they unavailable? Do they sacrifice themselves? Do they eventually want to change and control you? Are they needy? Are they avoidant? Do they withhold? Look at all the characteristics and then go back and see if you could find those in mom. And look at how you responded as a kid to them, to your mom and those behaviors as a child, and see where you're playing that out. And know, this is really important, that the patterns they're playing out are not the source of your suffering. That your response to the pattern is the suffering, the source of your suffering, which the response begins with an interpretation, how you're perceiving that action, what you're making it mean about yourself. That habitual way of thinking is the inner child in you still running the show. So when you see that, you see you're not dealing with your partner, you're dealing with a shadow figure, meaning an echo from your past, from a parent, copy and pasted onto your partner, that is designed to elicit a response, a reaction within you that has been on autopilot since its inception as a child, that has been choosing relationships, choosing partners, choosing patterns for the sole reason to bring it to the surface to complete itself and heal. And so it's not that you're a sign of healing. This is a later sign, but it's not that a sign of healing is you finally found a partner without those patterns. That's not what you should look for. It's that you're responding to those patterns in a new way to such a degree that you don't care if the pattern shows up, because you could simply respond in a new way, which might mean walk away, say no, but in love, not in judgment. And there's a complete autonomy and individualizing process that happens because, believe it or not, until these reactive patterns are healed, you will continue to feel enmeshed with mom. And the enmeshment is where you're still deriving your identity from mom, meaning you're wanting validation and love from her to feel like you're worthy and you're enough. Which means a part of me needs you to survive. I need you to be a certain way, to see me a certain way, just to survive, just to be me. So we attract these people to bring it up, and when we see the belief in the story that is rises to the surface so quickly, in a moment of feeling triggered, and we inquire, we stop, we inquire, we surrender to the feeling, and we question the story, which that process is what I teach, and we respond differently, you essentially just killed your mother, meaning you killed the part of you that is enmeshed with mom, that is deriving a sense of self and value from her. That part of your persona has died. And what's in its absence is you. So there's an individuating process that happens as a result of healing the mother wound. Your authenticity, your uniqueness is allowed out because you're no longer concerned with what mom thinks. Because you realize, number one, it's not that you were lacking their love as a child. That's true from the child's perspective because the child doesn't know any better. But when you really investigate it, it's not that you lacked their love. It's that you weren't able to love them and yourself in that moment as you shouldn't have, because children don't really have that capacity. So you're not to blame, and they're not to blame. But what you can do now is take responsibility and see that actually the only thing keeping me from letting go and forgiving my mother is where I can't love her now and where I can't love our entire process because of where I'm not taking complete ownership over my life. And I will keep attracting the same people in different disguises, the same patterns in different disguises over and over until I get that. And what happens is you actually become your mom's mother in a way, or mom's father in a way, because they're only repeating a pattern from their childhood where they're seeking the approval of mom or dad. So when you stop doing that and you, in the absence of that, are love itself, the seeking ends, which mean happiness, fulfillment arises in its absence, you can then love them as they are, which is like being a surrogate mother or father to them. You can become the source of something they might not have been able to access yet, which can be radical permission for them to heal. And that's actually what's happening in my family now. When I realize, there's still parts of me I'm hiding from my mother, meaning if she knew this, I'd feel shame. I'd feel like there's something wrong with me. And this is an exercise you can do. As soon as I realized that, I wrote a list of everything I'd hide from my mother. Sexual experiences. We'll just start with the peak experience, where I've had interactions I was ashamed of, or I was a bit forceful, where I was operating from ego, where I was really drunk, and I was just ashamed. I was like, I had that feeling still. Moments where I lied to her in the past. Moments where I lied to my dad that I didn't want her to know about. I mean, I just put it all onto paper. And I knew if I'm afraid of my mom seeing all of me, I'm going to hold back around her. And I don't want to do that. And again, this isn't something you don't have to share, but it's powerful to do because it's a powerful permission slip for them as well. And that's what I did. We got on a phone call and I said, Mom, you don't have to respond to any of this. I'm just going to share things that I've wanted to hide from you. This is totally selfish. This is just for me to feel totally myself around you. And like, there's nothing I need to hide. And, if you can just witness me and love me, that's great. If it brings up some stuff, that's okay too. I just really want to be witnessed in this. And I just shared all of it and I'm crying and I'm releasing. And of course, it brought us closer and there was so much love there and it was a beautiful process. It's another exercise you can do. So healing the mother wound is a process of individuation. It's a process of seeing the patterns that are playing out in your relationship, finding the root. For me, it was, I need someone to absolutely adore me and be there for me all the time. I need to be their life. Most of us don't want to admit we have that part of us, that we have this little child in us that demands something that is totally unrealistic. I need you to love me all the time, see me all the time, want to have sex with me all the time, want to accept all of me and give me all of my freedom. That's the little boy in us that wants to, or girl that is demanding in an unrealistic way. That's a 2-year-old, right? So we have to admit these things to be admitted into love, into transformation. So we find the pattern and we see what's underneath the pattern. The belief, they need to accept me. They need to show up a certain way. And these are all beliefs to take to inquiry. If they don't love me this way, if they don't admire everything that I do, then that means what? And when you get to that means and the story that follows, you'll see that that's the story the child created. And we take those stories, if they're not this way, if they're not that way, then that means blank. We take that through the process of inquiry. And that's a process of seeing the belief, the unconscious pattern, shifting it, which when that happens, there's a full body emotional reorientation, which can look like crying, sweating, tears, laughing. The body just reorients itself in this process. And that's the process I teach, integrated self-inquiry. So as you start doing that, 2 things happen. Number 1, you start to individuate. Number 2, you see your partner for who she really is versus who you think she is. So here's a shocker. You've never been in relationship with someone, with someone as they really are. Now, no matter what, we're going to filter someone through our mind. But I do believe it is possible to have close to 100%, maybe a 99.9% clear, transparent filter. And this is the difference between having vision, and having sight. Or I'll use it the other way around. I think vision sounds a little cooler. I think I see you, but having vision is I could see through my projections I overlay onto you. So you stop living with the overlay. And that was a big thing for me. As a child, when my brother was on drugs and we didn't know what was happening, and my dad was angry and my mom didn't want to meet the conflict, and it was kind of just hush, hush, hush. That in that field of energy, especially as sensitive children, we learned, okay, let's just pretend it's not happening and go play video games. So what is the pattern? Fantasy is safer than reality. So what would happen when I meet women? I would create a fantasy version of them. Because if I really confronted the red flags, if I really confronted the things that didn't feel good, that's dangerous. I might lose something. I mean, of course, that's probably what my mom was thinking. Well, if I really confront what's going on, I might lose the love of my kids. I might be seen as a bad mom. I might lose Brian. I might lose my husband. Fear of loss, fear of loss, fear of loss. So we develop that. And it's not because of them. It's because, again, of our interpretation, our response to our upbringing that we innocently assumed in the moment, which you can't even really take full responsibility for that as a kid, because that's an automatically assumed thing. That's just conditioning playing itself out. That's just the nature of the mind. Once we're aware of it and our faculties have developed, now we could take ownership and change the story. But when you believe there's something in your reality that you're not allowed to look at, it's too scary, it's too much, because that's been modeled by your parents, the only way to cope with it is to create a different reality, a fantasy reality. And by definition, that's disassociation. That is resistance. And you create an overlay of reality. So what do you do when you meet people and there's confrontation? You really don't want to confront because, I might lose this. I might lose this love, this connection, because I still think it's coming from you, because I still haven't dissolved the patterns that when they're dissolved, I feel that love actually emanating as me. Because I haven't done that yet. No matter how intellectually sound and how good it feels to go, I'm the source of my love, that's only known when the barriers to that love are dissolved. When you look at the shadow, you get really honest with yourself. Really honest. And so I would create an overlay to avoid the conflict and to avoid loss. Now, the paradox is as soon as you create an overlay to avoid fear, you've just lost. You experience loss because you leave reality. You're disconnected. You're living in a fantasy. Anything you do, even if it seems positive, to avoid reality is going to feel like resistance. It's going to feel like pain and suffering. So this fantasizing, this pedestalizing, idealizing, which is what I would do, because of course, growing up, to cope with what was going on, I didn't want to admit that my mom's not a good mother. And of course, I don't actually believe that story now, because everything that she didn't give me is exactly what I needed to be here now giving this to you. And at the time, as a child, it's very scary to admit that. Oh, my mom is deficient or is operating from fear or might be wrong about something. And I depend on her for my survival. So what do you do as children to cope with that? You defend your mother. And that's what I would do. I remember these kids in middle school would like say a "ya mama" joke to me, and I would freak out and I'd beat them up. So I was so defensive around my mother. Number one, because if I were to admit what was actually going on, that's just too scary. There's just too much there that I don't know, too much unknown, too much uncertainty that I could face as a child. And number two, if my dad's anger, if I see him at all as a perpetrator, which at times, I did when he took his anger out on us verbally, and there was very few times it didn't actually feel abusive. There was no like chronic abuse or anything like that. But there were moments where it was like, okay, I'm not ever going to mess with dad, and I don't ever want to be angry like that either. I'm not going to do that. So it would be easy to set up mom as a victim, dad as perpetrator. And that can create a type of man that doesn't own their anger and will either play the victim or will end up playing out the perpetrator, but won't be able to take responsibility for it and will blame the other person because it's too painful to be like dad. But typically we become what we have not healed. So we can see it in ourselves and forgive it. So everyone at some point will become mom or dad. And they're complete opposite as well, because that's the full circle of integration, all of it. So again, the healing was coming back to reality, admitting all of the relationships where I overlooked red flags. I said yes when it was a no to please, no when it was a yes, where I avoided conflict and then rebelled and withheld, just like that was happening to me, and I did it back to them because I wanted them to hurt. And when I would do it, there'd be a type of pleasure, and I would feel powerful. This is called negative pleasure. It's when you are deriving pleasure from a negative experience, meaning there's part of me that wants to punish you, make you wrong, make you bad for how you're controlling me, which is really where I felt like a victim. But in that context, I would look like a perpetrator. I would look like a heartbreaker. And that was a safe place to be for me, because if I could break your heart and leave, well, at least I'm not the one being rejected. I can't handle that. And people that have had similar experiences to me, go early in your relationships. You've probably had a rejection, a heartbreak that was really, really intense, and you didn't know what to do. And so part of you vowed, I'm never going to let that happen again. I'm going to attract a different kind of woman, and I'll be the one that leaves you before you leave me. That's a way we cope. Same, oh, mom wasn't there for me when I needed her, so I'm going to leave her this time to make her feel my pain, is our childlike way of getting revenge. And for me, it was, I'm going to move across the country. You want me really close? I'm out. You want to control me? Try to now. So I had to admit and see all of how that played out. And then I made amends. Mom, these are all the ways that I punished you. Mom, these are all the ways I wanted to hurt you and have you feel certain things, and I'm sorry. And I realized again, the source of my suffering wasn't who she was being towards me, it was who I was being towards her, which again is a reflection of how I'm being towards me. And as soon as that shifted and I started choosing to love her while being independent, while taking ownership over my life, everything started changing. And when me and my previous partner separated in January 2023, it was really hard for me to get closure because I didn't go deeper into this pattern. So the pattern was still alive in me, and I was still attracting women with these certain characteristics. And I had this separation conflict. Now, I'm going to show you what this is, because this is really, it's all connected. I had a separation conflict. Separation conflict is I wanted a certain kind of woman near me, but I also didn't. I also knew, I had this part of me that knew I need to individuate. I need time and space to integrate. I need to be so absolutely okay being alone and having none of these things that I've wanted from my mother. Zero dependency on those from the outside world. That's where my self-trust, that's where my self-love, that's where everything lies. Because again, with the mother wound, it's just going to leak into your business. You're not going to fully trust yourself. You're going to hold back anger. You're going to people please. That's going to show up in your business. It's going to create a glass ceiling. So I knew, not just for my business, for me, my friendships, for every area of my life, my health, I needed that. And yet I was still afraid of letting it go. As soon as I really sat with that and went deeper into inquiry, and I decided to let it go, and I had a couple conversations with certain women in my life that I was having this conflict, this push-pull. As soon as I let it go, this little rash showed up. Now in German New Medicine, this is the side, I believe it's this side. This is the side of a relationship, a conflict in relationship. If I had this on this side, it would be the area of parent figure. So because I had this separation conflict with romantic relationships, and as soon as I ended it, this showed up. Well, in German New Medicine, this is the healing phase, not the active phase. The active phase is pre-symptom. Because from the perspective of German New Medicine, what I would say is just truth, there is no disease. There's nothing trying to kill you in your body. Your body's always finding balance. The symptoms are the cure. The symptoms are healing you. So until you're ready for healing, there's no symptoms. And that could either mean you're in good health, or there's something, an active conflict. And as soon as you resolve the conflict, the body can go, okay, now let's purge this, change that, rearrange these hormones, and that's what symptoms are. So for me, this is also liver. So it was a release of anger, and it was a release of fear, because it's liver and kidneys. So it was a release of fear and anger, the fear of being alone, the anger of you didn't give me what I needed. You weren't there for me. You betrayed me, which is what would show up in my relationships, or you're controlling me, right? So as soon as I didn't have to, it wasn't like I had to go back to my first relationship and reconcile something, because that same pattern is here right now. So when I reconciled it now and that conflict was released, boom, the next day this showed up. And for the first few days it was really red, and there was a lot, and now it's almost gone. I mean, it's a little more widespread, but it's way less red, and it's slowly balancing and changing. And when I saw this, I celebrated. It was good news. It was like, yes, the healing is happening. My body is rearranging itself. So this is also all connected to our physical health. Even my tongue, and you could see some indents on the side. They used to be so much deeper. And on this side, there's barely 3 anymore. There's 3 little indents. Most of the time, there's only 2 here now, and they're starting to dissolve, which that's all liver, anger, and stored anger. So after all of that was processed, now my body is rearranging. My energy is coming back. I'm sleeping better than ever. My hormones are rearranging. So you can solve it now. It's never too late. If the pattern hasn't been transformed, it's playing out right now. Then it just takes honesty to meet that where it is. And the full circle is you're now going to be able to attract relationships from your essence, from your being, which is a formula for two coming together in service of God and truth to create something greater than you can individually. There will still be healing, but that essence will be its primary drive versus the very karmic, intense, we need to burn some stuff up. We need to transform a lot, roller coaster ride of most relationships. When your essence is doing the attracting and not your wounding. So if this was helpful and you want support in this process, whether you're a man or woman, doesn't matter, go to my website, book a session. We go for about an hour to an hour, 20 minutes. And in one inquiry session, we can really do a lot of work. I mean, most people, if they come in with a sense of what's going on, a few sessions, even, a month's worth of sessions, and all of this can be flipped on its head fairly quickly because truth is exponential. It's quantum. It's like the moment you access it now, any moment previously in your life that was a representation of the lie that you had to face to get to the truth also collapses. That's why it's called a miracle in A Course in Miracles. It's, when it's seen now, every event connected to it transforms. That sound actually is created, and you see the truth through the whole lineage of it, and then you have effortless gratitude. We don't need to will gratitude. Gratitude is natural when there's understanding. Gratitude is natural when you see truth. Gratitude is a fruit of the truth that grows the more you're willing to face, admit, and see lies, the lies of the ego, the untruths that you're believing to be true. And that's the only requirement for inquiry, is an open mind. I'm willing to be wrong, my ego to be wrong for the sake of peace and truth. That's the only requirement. And it's the truth that calms the nervous system. It's the truth that rearranges your hormones and allows excess toxins to come out of the salt in your eyes and the salt in your sweat. And your body knows how to do that. You don't have to tell your body how to do that. This is mind at cause of body expression. And that's where we go directly to the root with inquiry. And then the body has to follow. So again, thank you for watching. And I'm going to do one on the father wound as well, and a whole series on this. So stay tuned.